Welcome to another episode of Show and Tell Books. I'm Amber,
And I'm Chantel.
and today we're talking about our contemporary romance spice scale. So I'm kind of excited to talk about our spice scale because I feel like every time we see a recommendation for a book on social media, there's chili peppers or hearts trying to indicate like what the content is, if it's spicy or not. And I think it's so subjective, and depending on where the recommender is in their reading journey, their spice scale changes. So if they just started reading contemporary romance, then something that we would give, you know, a 2 to, they might be saying is a 5, but if they've been reading for a long time, something we would give an 8 to is a 2. So today we're just going to outline our spice scale for you. So when you see a recommendation from us, you know exactly what you're getting.
I think the thing I love about our spice scale specifically is like we give it a number out of 10, so it's from 0 to 10. And we also provide other book examples that are within that category. So that way, if for you a certain book is way spicier, then you know and you can adjust accordingly. So starting out with 0, so zeros are traditionally clean books. So similar books are like Edenbrook or any book by Sarah M. Eden. They don't have any smut, they don't have any sex. They might kiss, I guess, but there's also no cussing or things like that. So that's a 0.
It's what you would associate with a rating movie of the G, right? Your kids could read it. You're not going to question what they're reading, what kind of content they're going to see. A 1 on our scale is considered to be more fade to black or closed door romance with like references to intimate acts, but not descriptions. So a PG rating. Think about The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams or The Roommate by Soraya Wilson, where there is kind of this connotation of something's happening, but you don't actually see a description of it. The first 2 ratings for us are books that you could talk to your grandma or your aunt about and not be embarrassed. Although we all know they probably read stuff like this too. You can wear the fan merch out in public, and if someone asks you, you're not going to be like, well, let me tell you about this book that you're going to look at me weird for.
Exactly. That is like the best description for them.
Yeah.
So number 2 is kind of what we'd kind of qualify as like a just barely PG-13 rating. So they're a little bit more obvious, I guess, in sexual nature. You know, it's next in line. It's a little bit more overt as opposed to what the previous 2 ratings were. So for like examples, think of like People We Meet on Vacation or When in Rome by Sarah Adams. So it's a little bit more out there, but nothing that would truly be, I guess, super PG-13 in manner.
On 3, we're moving up that scale. These books have more explicit descriptions with kissing, minor descriptions of sexual acts. So you're thinking like, okay, we're no longer just leaving it up to the imagination, we're actually describing it. Basically books that often you see in the new adult category now in the contemporary romance genre. So Every Summer After by Carly Fortune is an example of this. We also put The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren in this category, where you kind of have it adding to the relationship, but it's not the main focus of the relationship.
Okay, so number 4 are books that have, again, more overt kind of sexual scenes. They're usually fully in like the PG-13 category, the new adult category, or even like smut. So we definitely have like moved up in level. So 2 books that are kind of an example of this are Thank You for Listening by Julia Wayland and Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I feel like for the most part, a lot of Emily Henry books kind of fall more into this category, simply because it is a little bit more out there.
Number 5, this is what we would classify as the non-excessive, slightly explicit descriptions of sex scenes. They serve a purpose within the plot, but are a natural progression of the intimacy within the relationship. So we think The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker or The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood are perfect examples of this. You're still getting the description of what's going on, but it's not just to keep throwing in a description of what's going on.
Exactly. Again, like this is our interpretation and kind of how we rank things. So 6 is excessive or explicit sex scenes. And for reference, we kind of picked It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey or A Not So Meet Cute by Megan Quinn. Specifically, I think for us, the use of smut or sex to add spice, but not necessarily to add to the actual relationship between the two main characters, is what I think is the defining characteristic of from a 6 on in our spice scale, simply because they don't actually add anything to the plot, or even they don't add anything romantically to the relationship. And I think that is what our biggest issue is with these types of smut books, which for me personally, I don't really read books past a 6 or a 7.
Yeah, I would add on our 6 rating, this is where we would equivalent it to an R rating within a movie rating system. You're getting more curse words, you're getting more descriptions of other things besides just the sexual acts that you're kind of like, is this necessary? Like, for example, A Not So Meet Cute by Megan Quinn, there's more foul language in that. There's more derogatory terms used. So it's not just about the description as much as it is kind of overall, we're seeing in this book a lot of things that we don't necessarily want to consume in our media. Which brings us to 7. These are the books with what we would consider large amounts of extremely explicit descriptions of sex that don't further the plot or contribute positively. Read red flags in all caps. To the personal relationship of a couple, you're seeing things you wouldn't want to accept in real life. Why are we accepting it in these fictional stories? So our examples are Verity by Colleen Hoover, which I haven't read. Because I'm
really
just
insert any Colleen Hoover book, really.
Right. And for example, I'm one of those readers who won't pick up a Colleen Hoover book just because I've seen so many reviews that talk about how these characters have red flags and it's abusive in a manner that I don't think is acceptable. Another example is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, where we wouldn't necessarily put the other books in that series at this level of the scale, but because of the content in that book in particular, it's made a 7 rating for us. Like Chantel said, 8, 9, and 10 are typically not books that we read. So these books usually fall into the darker romance or why choose subcategory, usually extremely explicit and descriptive, and you will probably never see us recommending one of those books.
No. So like, for example, To Love Jason Thorne is within that category. Faking with Benefits is also in that category. 50 Shades of Grey, again, kind of like what we talked about. I think Amber and I are really big on a book can have smut if it helps further the romantic relationship within a couple. And I'm not talking about like further them within sex, but like furthering their actual connection. Like what Amber said, if it's a red flag in real life, why are we promoting it in books? So that kind of explains, I think, a lot of the background behind our contemporary romance spice scale, and kind of how we ranked it. We're constantly changing up and adding to and finding new books because, again, we're constantly reading. So the scale itself stays the same. Just the books within that category change.
I'd say that's like how we evolve as readers, right? Sometimes the longer that we've been reading some of these books, the more we're like, oh, I'm starting to notice this more. Like with Megan Quinn, she has books that I would almost always, just based off of the cover, know are going to start at a 6. Or she has her cartoon drawn covers where I'm like, oh, that's probably going to start closer to a 4 or 5. And it just depends on what is actually used in the story to determine where it falls on the scale. I will also say, like, I'm notorious for picking up a book without having any context. So if I see a cute cover or I see someone who like just holds it up real quick on TikTok, I won't read a review. I won't read the description of the book. I'll just kind of pick it up and say, what's this one about? And that's kind of bit me in the butt a few times where I've picked up books that I'm like, oh, I didn't actually want to consume this. So that's why we're trying to be extremely transparent about our scale, is so that if you see us holding it up and saying, oh, this is what we'd rate it, you know what you're getting into.
I really love the fact that we did this scale and we like explicitly put it out, simply because, like you said, like a lot of people with BookTok or book influencers in general, their spice scale changes depending on how frequently they read or what kind of books they read. And that's fine because that's them consuming it. But it makes it hard when there are certain influencers you love and then they recommend something and maybe spice or smut to an extent isn't your thing. So if they say, oh, this book is great, it's only one chili pepper, and you read it and you're like, that's not one chili pepper. So for example, like my introduction into smut was Not So Meet Cute by Megan Quinn. And it is not my cup of tea now, like several years later, it's still not my cup of tea. I don't like it. So this has helped me a lot be like, okay, guys, if you like this book, here's a similar book. And I think it's a little bit more universal by using like a 10-point scale than just using chili peppers are, because I think the chili pepper ended up being a lot more subjective and personal. Whereas like a 10-point scale, I think it gives you a better interpretation of where certain books are at because you have other examples.
It's hard sometimes because there are some books that were like, oh, the first book in this series is a 5. But as the series goes on, A Court of Thorn and Roses being a perfect example, you never know what you're going to get. So we try to be very specific, and it's this particular book when we talk about a series, not the whole series.
I really think we're actually open. If you guys have questions about like, okay, have you read this book? What would you rate it? Or what book is it similar to in spice level or smut level? We're pretty open to telling you guys our thought, or at least also be like, okay, well, it's very similar to this book or that book. And then that might give you guys a better context and example. And then you can determine for yourself if you want to read a book or not. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you guys found this spice scale actually somewhat helpful. If you guys have any questions about it or want us to kind of like rate a certain book, let us know in a comment. Don't forget to watch some of our other videos, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for joining.